Hello, it's Kat, and in today's tutorial, we'll be creating this realistic pool water background and this realistic 3D floating beach ball in Adobe Illustrator. We'll be using gradient mesh, the blob brush tool, and the new 3D tools that are added to Adobe Illustrator in 2022. They're a big improvement over the 3D tools that we had previously, so I'll show you a quick and easy way to get started with that. Since this is a bit of a longer tutorial, I'll be splitting it up into two parts. In the first part, we will go ahead and create the realistic water background, and in the second part, we'll do the 3D beach ball. I will be adding chapter markers, so feel free to skip around if you're just here to learn a specific step. If you'd like to follow along with the whole tutorial, there is a link to a free starter file in the description down below. Let's get started. To get started making the pool water, we'll grab our rectangle tool here, click once on your artboard, and I'm going to make this 1920 by 1080 pixels. That matches the size of our artboard. Click OK. And I'm using this blue color that you can grab from the starter file, just called pool water. It is a global swatch. I will show you how that works in a bit. And then once I have my rectangle, I'm just going to go here to the shortcut keys and make sure that it's aligned horizontally and vertically to my artboard. Next, we're going to add some color variation to our rectangle using the gradient mesh tool. I have a sample here just to show you the effect we're going for. We're just going to be using these subtle gradient points to add some lights and shadows to our water. So let's go ahead and do that now. Click over here to grab your gradient mesh tool, and we'll just be adding points randomly. A single click will add a gradient mesh point to your image here. And there's no particular pattern or order that I'm using. I just want it to be slightly random to mimic the effect of water, and just click a few points here. We will go back and add and rearrange points once we're done this. Now, using our direct select tool, by either selecting it here or hitting A on your keyboard, you can select individual points on this mesh. And here's how the global color swatch comes into effect. We start with our full color on the spectrum, and you can adjust this so that you're getting tints of that color. And that's what I'm going to be doing to add the lights to my water. The base color will basically be our shadow. So I'm just going to select a couple of these random points here and give them just different highlight colors. Some will be more medium, some will be a little bit brighter, and I'll speed this part of the process up for you. Once you're done adjusting your gradient mesh colors, you should have something that looks vaguely like this. Basically, we're just trying to see some shadows and some light and just get the vague impression of water started. Next, we'll be using our direct select tool to adjust the gradient mesh points, and this basically is going to give us sort of a smeared look. So we're going to make this just a little bit more random by pulling some of the points around. There's no exact science to this step. I'm just going to do it until it looks a little bit like smeared paint. And make sure that you're keeping your lines soft. I'm not really adjusting handles too much on these points, I'm just dragging them. And you can also go back and adjust your colors here. Perhaps this point is a little bit too light, so I can go in here and just adjust it down or up, depending on what you think. And I'll speed this part up for you as well. So I've finished smudging my points around, and you can see the mesh looks a little weird, but that's okay. This just gives us a nice soft background to start building our highlights and shadows on. I'm going to lock the mesh background and add a sublayer to my pool water layer for this next step. We'll start the same way we did with the first layer by grabbing our rectangle tool, clicking anywhere on the artboard, and setting this to 1920 by 1080. We're going to fill this with the same blue that we used for the original, and again, center it horizontally and vertically to our artboard. And we'll call this layer highlight. And basically what we're going to do is give ourselves some random sections to trace that would represent the highlights that you see on the surface of pool water. So for that, with your rectangle selected, we're going to go to the Effect menu, down here to Texture, and I'm going to choose Stained Glass. Now you can kind of see what this gives us, and we're going to manually trace over these, but it just helps when you're not really comfortable drawing random shapes on your own. I'm going to zoom out here just so you can see. This is what it's going to give us. I have my cell size set to 45, my border thickness set to 4, and light intensity doesn't really matter for this because we're not using this image in the final, it's just our template. So I'm going to click OK, and now you'll see this has added that to our image. I'm going to lock that and just do a quick layer on top of this, and that's where we'll trace. To start tracing in the basis for my highlights, I'm going to use the blob brush tool. If you double click on that, you'll bring up the tool options window. I'm using the size 12 points with a variation of 6 points, and I do have my pressure sensitivity turned on. I'm using a Wacom tablet for this, but you can absolutely use a mouse, no problem there. And I've got my smoothing set right in the center here. And then we'll just click OK. The color that I'm using for this is actually the same swatch that we've been using with the pool color, and I have it turned down to about 38% tint, and that will give us a nice light color that complements the base color as we start drawing here. Now, using my blob brush, I'm just going to start in this bottom corner and just loosely trace around these shapes. I'm going to make sure that the corners aren't too sharp. So if I see a sharp corner like right here, I'm just going to round it out a little bit. This does not have to be perfect. These lines will eventually get blurred out. We're just laying down our basis for those shapes that you usually see on top of water. As you can see, I'm going all the way around each shape. Your paths don't matter here, so you don't really have to worry about whether the blob brush is adding to a single path, because we're just going to use the entire shape when we're done. So I'm just going to continue tracing around here. I'll speed this part up for you. Okay, now that I have my tracing done, I'm going to go into my layers palette here, and I'm going to unlock the highlight layer here and just delete the stained glass that we put. And now you can see our gradient mesh through our highlight layer. I'm keeping the gradient mesh locked, and here on the highlights, I'm going to select that, go back into my blob brush here. I'm going to press Control H to hide edges. Just for a moment so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to smooth out certain parts and add a little thickness randomly here and there. Again, this doesn't matter too much. It's just a matter of preference. And I'll speed up this detail work for you for a second here. So all I've done here is just round out some of the corners and just thicken up here where the edges are meeting. And that kind of gives you that natural water look already. Now that we have the basis for our water highlights and shadows, I'm going to make a few copies of this layer. We want to end up with 5 identical copies. So selecting this layer, you can go to your menu here, duplicate, select again, duplicate, one more time, duplicate. Now I'm just going to number these just for organizational purposes. You don't have to do this part. Now, 3 of these layers are going to be our highlight layers and 2 will be our shadows. For now, I'm just going to turn off the shadows, and then we're going to start here working with layer 3. Let's go ahead and click in the selection column in your layers palette so that everything on that highlights 3 layer is selected. And the first thing we'll do is go into our transparency panel, and we're going to bump the transparency of this layer down to about 78%. And the second thing we'll do is go to the Effect menu, go down here to Blur and choose Gaussian Blur. And we're going to turn this up to about 18 pixels. And if you check and uncheck the preview, you can see there that it's blurred that out quite a bit. And just click OK. That's all we're doing with that layer. Now we will go and select our layer 2. The same way. And for the highlights 2 layer, we're going to go again into the transparency panel. This time we'll switch the blend mode to screen, which lightens everything behind it. And then we will set the opacity here to about 48% and just hit enter. And again, we'll go to our effects menu, to the blur menu, Gaussian blur. And for this one, I'm going to go with about 9 pixels of blur and just click OK there. Now for our top layer, this highlights 1 layer, we'll select that again. And I'm going to show you a quick trick to get those really intense highlights in the corners of our little cells here. So for this, we will go to Object, Path, and click Offset Path. And we're going to go with -10 pixels. It's a bit hard to see here because I have my edges still hidden, but we're just going to click OK. And I'm going to do Control H to turn my edges back on. And now you can see what we've got here. So it's just going to give us that path, but shrunken down so that you'll get these little bits of highlights here and there. Now for this layer, again, we're going to go into transparency, and this layer will be screen, and we're going to set it to about 60% opacity and just hit enter there. And we're not going to blur this layer because these are the sharper highlights that you want to see. This layer looks a bit opaque, so if you go ahead and expand this layer by hitting the arrow, you'll see that a group was created when we did the offset path function. What we want to keep is the smaller compound path that's just the highlights in the center here. So if you click on this second compound path down, we can go ahead and just hit the delete key. And that's it for our highlights. Now we'll move on to our water shadows. Before we do our shadows, I'm just going to lock the highlight layers here. And now I'm going to turn layer 4 and 5 of the highlights back on. And I'm going to click in the selection column, hold Shift and click again so that I have both of those layers selected. Now I will grab my rotation tool. Your shortcut for that is the O key on your keyboard. And if you click and hold, you'll see that it starts rotating around the center point. But if you hold down Shift and move your cursor horizontally, it will flip the image. So we want to do that horizontally. And then I'm going to click somewhere here near the bottom here. Again, click and hold, holding Shift. And I'm just going to drag upwards to also flip it vertically. Now we've got a little bit of variation in our patterns. While I have both of these layers selected, I'm going to go into the color palette and move the slider all the way back up to 100 so that we're using our base color, which will give us a nice shadow color. And now we'll start making a few adjustments to these. If you go into your layers palette now, everything should be deselected. And we're just going to grab grab layer 4. And for this layer, we are going to bump the opacity down. So go into your transparency panel and we'll just bump it down to about 80%. Leave the blending mode on normal and hit OK there. And we're going to add a blur through the blur menu. For this layer, we'll do about 9 pixels and hit OK there. Now we will go back to the last layer here, layer 5, click in the select column. And we will change the blend mode on this one to multiply, which will darken things behind it. And we're going to drop the opacity down to about 75%, hit OK there. And then the last thing we'll do to this layer is go ahead and add another blur effect. This time we'll bump it up to around 18 pixels and just hit OK there. Now you can see you've got this secondary layer shadows under our highlights. So it gives that depth effect. It looks like there's light refracting to the bottom of the pool. Now that I got my highlights and shadows layer in, I'm going to make a quick adjustment to the mesh layer, making sure everything's locked except that mesh layer right now so it's easier to select. And I'm using my direct selection tool. And I'm just going to find some random points on here and go back and maybe add a few more highlights where they've gotten lost behind all of our new shadows and details. I'll just do this randomly here and there a bit until you're happy with how it's looking. This is an optional step, but I feel like it adds a little bit of realism. If you'd like to see how this will export, you can go to the View menu and click Trim View, and that is our pool water. We will now move on to making the 3D beach ball and using the new 3D effects. I'm going to start drawing the beach ball on a new layer, so I'll collapse this and just lock the pool water layer and move to my beach ball layer. Now I'm just going to move the artboard aside and start creating our pattern for the beach ball off to the side here. I'm going to grab my medium pink color here as a base and then work with our rectangle tool, just clicking once on the artboard. I'm going to start out at 940 by 940 pixels. Click OK, and I'm going to turn off trim view here so that we can see what we're working with. Next, I'll create a circle in the center. I'm going to grab my lightest pink and the ellipse tool. I'm going to click once and set this at 90 by 90 pixels and click OK. Now, using my select tool, I'm going to shift click both of these so I have them selected and just use these buttons to make sure that they are vertically and horizontally centered together. Now we'll make the stripes on the ball. To start my stripes, I'm going to grab my square here and I'm going to use Control-C and Control-F or Command-C and Command-F on a Mac, and that just makes a copy and pastes it exactly in place over this square. Now I'm going to change it to this darker pink color, and I'm going to go up here to my transform panel and make sure that this top left corner is clicked because we want it to scale up to the corner. And changing this to 300 pixels will make a smaller square in this corner here. Now I'm going to grab and just click this corner node. And if we drag it down to our circle, you should see center or intersect here, and that makes it even with the center of our circle. If you don't see that, you can turn on Smart Guides. That's under your View menu. Now we have one corner, and we just want to reflect this into the 3 other corners here. So I'm going to switch to my select tool, grab this, Control-C to copy it, Control-F to paste it in place. And now we'll switch to our reflect tool, which is right here on your toolbar or O on your keyboard. And holding down Shift, I'm going to click and drag to the right, and that's going to reflect it horizontally for us. And then I'm going to just move this over. I'm holding Shift to keep it constrained to this angle and just snap it into that corner. Now we can select both of these and we'll just do the same thing, Control-C, Control-F, and O to switch to our rotate tool. And now I'm going to drag from top to bottom to flip it vertically. And with those two still selected, holding Shift, I'm just going to move them down till they snap into the corners down here. This is our shape that we're going to map onto our 3D ball, and that will give it the beach ball look that we're going for with the stripes. Now that we have our beach ball pattern, I'm just going to select the whole thing here, and I'm going to go to my symbols palette and just click New Symbol, and I'm going to call this beach ball pattern. And creating this as a symbol just makes it a quick and easy option to choose when we go to add our graphics to our 3D shape. Okay, now that I've made this a symbol, I can just delete this from my artboard and you'll see that it still exists in your symbols panel. Now I'm going to begin creating the beach ball. The base shape for the ball, we're going to grab the darkest pink here and switch to our ellipse tool. I'm just going to click once and we're going to make the ball shape 450 by 450 pixels and click OK. And now we start doing the 3D magic. So with the ball selected, we'll go up to our window menu, and at the top of the list here, you'll see 3D and materials. Click that. And you'll get this handy panel with all the new 3D options in it. Now, the first thing we'll do is go to the Object tab here, and we're going to click Inflate. You can see that this instantly gives us a spherical looking ball. Now, you can click Inflate both sides. This means as we rotate it around, it will be a perfect sphere. If we don't click that and we start moving it around, you can see that this is actually just a half circle. So I'm just going to undo that, click Inflate both sides, And now when we rotate it, you can see that it's a full ball. Undo that as well. So now we're just at the default settings here. All we've clicked is inflate, depth is 10 pixels, volume is 100%, and we've inflated both sides. Before I adjust my angles, I want to be able to see the stripes and the pattern that will be on the ball. So I'm going to switch over here to my materials tab, and we're going to use the base material here, but there are lots down here that you can experiment with that come packaged with the new 3D features. For now, I'm going to switch to the graphics tab, and you can see that it's already pulling what I have in my symbols palette. So I'm just going to click on the pattern to apply it. And now you can see the stripes applied to your beach ball. Now I want to adjust how shiny the ball is. So I'm going to switch from the graphics tab to the materials tab. And in my menu here, I'm going to make sure I click on the default material. And then if we scroll down here, you'll see a roughness slider. By default, it's set at 0.4. I'm going to just highlight this and do 0.03, and that should give us a much more reflective surface. Now to start to see where this really shines, I'm going to click on the lighting tab here, and I'm going to click this button to turn on ray tracing. And this may slow down your computer a little bit depending on what you're working with. You can turn it on and off depending on if you want the preview done, but now that you've clicked that, every time we make an adjustment, your computer will re-render this 3D that's going on. So before we make any lighting adjustments, I'm going to go back to the object menu, and we're going to set the rotation for the ball. Down here in your rotation, I'm going to manually set these. I want to go with 24 degrees for the first rotation, and then 48 in the second box here. And then we're going to do 72 for the final one. And this gives me an angle I like. Now that you have it, you can see how the lighting is working, and feel free to manually drag it around and adjust as well. Note that there's just a little bit of a delay each time you do this. That's fine, and you can put this at any angle you want. And with my angle adjusted, I'm going to switch back to the lighting tab, and we'll make some adjustments here now. For the intensity, I want to amp this up a little bit, so I'm going to drag it somewhere around 125%. I'm going to leave the rotation as it is. For height, I want the light to be coming from a little bit higher, so I'm going to amp this up to about 90%. That makes it look like it's coming sort of from overhead like the sun would. And then for softness, I do want to soften this up a little. I'm going to say around 80% for this, to see what that looks like. And then for intensity, I want to really amp this up because it's a bright sunny day. So I'm going to put this at 130%. So we're starting to get that bounce back light like you would if you were in a really sunny situation in a pool. And I think I want to soften it up just a bit more. So I'm going to bump this up around 90% and see what that looks like. And now that I'm seeing the lighting, I want the angle to look a little bit more like it's facing the top. And I'll leave the shadows turned off for now. Now we can see that our beach ball looks 3D, but we are missing some shadows in the pool. It looks like it's kind of just floating in a different space. So we're going to go ahead and add some shadows and some ripples around the beach ball to make it look like it's floating in this pool water. I'll close my 3D panel because we're done with that now. Just going to zoom out a bit and decide where I want the beach ball in the composition. And now what we'll do is go to our layers panel. I'm going to lock the beach ball layer, create a new layer, and drag it right under the beach ball, between the beach ball and the pool water. And this will be our shadow layer. Now on this layer, we're going to switch back to the pool color and grab our ellipse tool. And I'm just going to click and drag, holding shift to get a circle, and make a circle that's a bit larger than your beach ball. And we're going to switch this in the transparency panel to multiply mode. And we're going to add a blur effect by going to our effect menu, blur, Gaussian blur. I'm going to go up to about 60 pixels and click OK. And now that's a little bit intense, so I'm just going to knock the opacity down to somewhere around 66%. And I want to make a second copy of the shadow, so I'm just going to select it and use Control-C, Control-F to paste that back in place. I'm going to make this one slightly smaller, holding down Shift. And I'm just going to move it so that it's more visible on this side of the beach ball, on the left and the top. And for this one, I'm going to bump the opacity back up to around 80%. And if we go into our appearance panel here, you can edit the Gaussian blur effect by clicking on this, and it will open that window back up. And I'm going to scale this down to somewhere around 36 pixels, just so that it has a slightly harder edge than the other shadow. And now our ball is starting to look like it's floating in the water. And what will really help is adding the ripple effect around on the surface here. So we'll do that next. Before I start painting my ripples, actually, I just want one more layer here to keep things organized. I'm going to collapse and lock the shadow layer. And I'll just name this ripples. And for the ripples, we're going to use our blob brush tool again. Make sure you're starting with the pool blue that we're using, and we're going to knock it down to about 44%. And grab your blob brush. It should be on the same settings that we used to draw our pool water reflections in the first step. I'll zoom in here just so I have a better view of what I'm doing. And now I'm just going to loosely paint some ripply lines around the edges of this ball. So you don't want to do full circles. You just want to make sure there's a few breaks here and there and that they overlap a little bit. And for these ripple layers, we're going to do something very similar to how we made the reflections in the pool. I'm going to switch to my transparency panel, and we'll put this into screen mode and knock the transparency down to around 68%. Now going back to my layers panel, I'm going to duplicate this entire layer by hitting this menu, going to duplicate ripples. So now we've got 2 copies, and we're going to use that same trick that we used before. With just this one layer selected, I'm going to switch to my reflect tool. You can do that by hitting O on your keyboard and holding Shift and clicking and dragging. I'm going to flip this horizontally and vertically just to give us a little bit of variation and overlap there. And now I'll be applying a blur effect to both of these layers, one slightly more than the other. So going to our layers panel, just make sure that you have the top copy selected, and we're going to go to the effect menu, blur, Gaussian blur. And for this, we're going to do something really low. I'm going to say 3 pixels. And now we'll switch to our underlying ripples by clicking in the select column here. Again, go back to our effect menu, Gaussian blur. And for this layer, we're going to go a little bit blurrier. We'll go 9 pixels. And now you can see that those are blurred out somewhat. They do need to be a little bit more organic. We're going to use the warp tool to do that. The warp tool can be found under your width tool menu, or you can hit Shift R on your keyboard to get that. And if you double click on it, you'll see a settings box come up. I'm using a 100 pixel by 100 pixel brush with about 50% intensity. The detail level is at 2 and simplify is around 50%. And it's just going to allow me to smudge slightly as I click and drag over my lines. So I want to do that just to give them a little bit more of an organic ripply feel. Okay, and once you're done smudging, you have your pool ripples. I feel like they're just a little bit intense, so I'm going to go into my layers palette here. And for the top ripple, I'm going to adjust the transparency down to 60%. And going back to my layers panel again, grabbing the bottom ripples, I'm going to adjust that transparency to around 48% and see how that looks. I hope this was helpful. It's just a quick introduction to the very basics of the 3D tools in Illustrator. I do plan to do a few more in-depth tutorials in the future on this. In the meantime, leave any questions you have in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and hope you have a great day.